Well, hello everybody and welcome. This is Lizzie and Justin from Thirdspace, and we are here again for another week of Turning Towards Life. And welcome everybody. We know that lots of you listen in different ways, so you might be with us live in our Facebook group on a Sunday morning, UK time, but you may well be listening on a podcast or Spotify or YouTube or who knows where, and wherever you are and whenever you are, welcome to this maybe even 270th week of our talking to one another, which is you and I, Lizzie, talking to one another, but it's really everyone being in a very big conversation. So thank you, Lizzie, for bringing a wonderful, fantastic source this week, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Justin. Good morning, everybody, and welcome here. As Justin says, we are going to do our usual practice of delving into a source, something that one of us has found. This week it's me who's found something, and we're going to read the source, each of us, and then see what happens in the conversation between us. I think it's worth saying again, Justin, this is unrehearsed and unplanned, and we haven't even spoken about the source before we get here, and how wonderful that is the case. So we're going to read each and then see what happens. And you can see the source if you want to, I think, in the podcast show notes. And also if you go to turningtowards.life, you can see every episode and the video and also the source and something that Justin's written about it as well. Actually, Justin, I want to take a minute to appreciate people receive an email into their inbox and or go to the source on turningtowards.life. And every time you write the most beautiful summary of our conversation, I don't think I've ever mentioned it to you. I read it and I think,
thank you.
How amazing is that summary of the conversation, that you have the power and capability and skill to summarize something and distill it into something inviting that makes me want to go, oh, I want to listen to that. So I just want to say thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. It's a joy to write those, actually, to try and feel in afterwards, given that they can't be written before because we have no idea what we're going to say, and to try and find something that's true to the conversation and inviting and short enough that people can read it and get a sense of what they're getting themselves into when they put their headphones in their ears and hang out with us for half an hour.
So if you really want to encounter that lovely piece of Justin's creativity, you can sign up to the weekly email that arrives in your inbox, which is kind of also a reminder to listen and a way to click really easily towards listening. So you can sign up at turningtowards.life if you'd like to do that, and they come on a weekly basis sometime after this broadcast has happened during the week.
Lizzie, before we read, I want to just mention one other thing, which is that now and again we remember to tell everybody about Thirdspace, which is the something from which this whole conversation arises. And the reason I want to say something about it now is if you're with us and you've never headed across to Thirdspace, you can find us at thirdspace.org, and we've got things coming up that you can join, things that are related to the various passions and commitments that those of us who are involved in Thirdspace are up to, including some wonderful things on coaching. So maybe we'll remember to mention that now and again, that we are thirdspace.org.
It's a very lovely website, I have to say, as well. The writing on it is really beautiful. Anyway, so this is our source. It's by someone called Rachel Naomi Raymond, and it goes like this. Perhaps the most important thing we bring to another person is the silence in us. Not the sort of silence that is filled with unspoken criticism or hard withdrawal. The sort of silence that is a place of refuge, of rest, of acceptance of somebody as they are. We're all hungry for this other silence. It is hard to find. In its presence, we can remember something beyond the moment, a strength on which to build a life. Silence is a place of great power and healing.
Perhaps the most important thing we bring to another person is the silence in us. Not the sort of silence that is filled with unspoken criticism and hard withdrawal, the sort of silence that is a place of refuge, of rest, of acceptance of someone as they are. We are all hungry for this other silence. It is hard to find. In its presence, we can remember something beyond the moment, a strength on which to build a life. Silence is a place of great power and healing.
Thanks, Justin. So, as you read, Justin, and as I was reading, the thing that jumped out immediately to me is that the phrase is the silence in us, which is different just to silence because you can't hear somebody saying something. It's the silence on the inside of us that allows us to be a kind of space where we can be with someone in a simple, unagendered, open way, where we haven't decided what we're going to say yet, and we haven't decided what we're going to do yet, and there's no action inside or outside somehow. And I found this so moving to read because it's probably happening a lot of the time without it being acknowledged. Like in a home, for example, there might even be more silence than there is not silence. And what is that? What's it made of? So I got really curious about the way that our inner silence, our inner spaciousness, our inner capacity to be, how that actually determines like the soup that we're all swimming in. You know, we have such value around words and speaking and language because it's so visible. And then there's this whole invisible realm of our inner silence. And I wonder what that's creating all the time. I suddenly got super curious about the moments of just being and what value that brings. And the fact that Rachel Naomi Raymond says we're all hungry for this other silence, it makes total sense to me. Because it's not like it feels like the opposite of cold. It feels cultivating, it feels curious, it feels interested, it feels open. And so I think those qualities turn into atmospheres somehow. They turn into the weather, turn into the feeling of a home or a place, of how we coexist with one another.
I'm really taken by what you pointed out, Lizzie, about the silence in us, which extends in the ways that you're talking about, maybe to the silence between us, you know, when we're just bumbling along alongside one another or having our lives unfold alongside one another. It seemed to me in listening to you that this silence that's in us is something, what does Rachel Naomi Raymond say? It's hard to find and we're hungry for it. That it's one of the reasons it's hard to find is because very often in our culture, and I'm generalizing and talking about the wider cultural soup in which we all swim, regardless of our personal cultures and family cultures and all of that, our culture has rightly recognized the power of language, but at the cost of silence between us. So many of our private spaces and our public spaces are filled with language all the time. There's language coming at us from all different directions. But also because maybe because of the very same thing, it's really hard for many of us not also to be filled inside with language and noise. So we long for it with one another. There is something so beautiful about being alongside someone else who is quiet in this way, and feeling the kind of welcome that that creates, where I can be with you just as I am. And it's really fine to be here. And like Rachel says, there's a ground, something upon which we can stand in it. I'm also getting really interested as we're talking and sort of just feeling into it in myself, because I think it's possible to have this even as we speak, is what the nature of the silence inside might be. And I had an experience just this week. I was in a workshop earlier in the week where one of the people who was hosting guided all of us who were there with some language into finding out what really exactly this. It's wonderful that you sort of resonance that you've brought this. What's the nature of the experience, the something that is there underneath? Once you get underneath all of your inner language, our inner language, and once we get underneath all of the inner fright and anxiety about how things are going and how things are going to go and all of that, and once we get underneath all of our holding on, and we get underneath all of our self-criticism and shame and guilt about this and that and everything, underneath all of that, it seems really true to me, is something very quiet and very loving and very open. And sometimes we can get helped getting a little bit of contact with the sort of the undercurrent, the something that is before everything else comes in, all of our ways of grasping and holding on. And I think that's what Rachel Naomi Remen is writing about, is that there's something really fundamental about us that is loving and patient and open and quiet, and is the ground for all of the action that we take. It's not opposite to all the things that we have to get done and all the ways that we can improve the world and help one another and fix things and make things. It's not at odds with that, but it's like the soil from which all of that grows. And maybe the reason that we long for it so much in one another is because when somebody else can bring that to us, it makes it safe for us to remember who we are too. So we get to come home to ourselves in the presence of this kind of generous rest, refuge, and silent acceptance that someone else is, reminds us of the very same in us, and then we get to be that for one another.
It's just taking what you were saying, Justin, and feeling into what kind of relationship it makes. You know, when you sit there with your inner silence, the silence in you, the spaces in you present and in your own awareness and your own cultivation, like your intentionality around that. It feels like it allows me to find things that I've never found before as well. But because you're not jumping in or taking up all of the space with questions or with language or whatever, I have a different kind of experience than the normal one where there's language flying around the whole time. And so then what feels possible to me is that something actually new can arise for me. You know, I feel like I spend so much time in the kind of old worn groove of whatever my inner critic talks like and whatever my patterns on the inside are. But those are just kind of habitual, everyday, quite small thoughts, quite mostly like a circle or a dead end or something. The kind of general fears that I have and the catastrophizing that I do, and, you know, and then as I sit in the presence of somebody and just having you as that inner silence in service of me somehow, I feel like the possibility of new ground opens up. You know, like you said, there's a foundational ground of silence that maybe we all are. Somehow, I feel like as you sit in contact with your inner silence, I'm allowed or given permission somehow in the relational field between us to access that inner silence for myself. And it's not an empty place. It has new ground in it that I can find out about myself, that I can learn. I can come up with things that are helpful or life-giving, that show me more things about my life, about life itself. So I'm feeling the gift of that kind of spaciousness, because it also affords me a chance and gives me courage to say the things that, like, there's a safety about it, I think. There's a safety with a mutual and simultaneous invitation to say more or to bring something else that I haven't brought yet or have been too afraid to bring. Like, your silence implies an invitation to me to say what there is that's here. So this kind of gentle, non-verbal invitation to bring myself seems to arise as I encounter and wonder and feel into your spaciousness and your inner silence. And so this kind of listening, this kind of receiving of another seems to me to not only be receiving what's here, but that it also, bless you, invites more than what's here. Things that haven't really been here before get to be brought because of that spaciousness, because of that, like you said, there's an openness inside of it.
I realize as I'm sitting here with you that it's my practice here in this conversation to see how quiet I can let myself be inside whilst you're speaking. Because it's so tempting just doing this to be, I know we say at the start always, we have no idea which way this conversation is going to go, which is really true. And I also notice that there's a sort of temptation that arises in me whilst you're speaking to have a little micro version of getting ready for what I'm going to say. Like, we won't plan the whole conversation, but if I can plan how I'm going to respond to you whilst you're talking, at least I'll be in control of a little bit. So I practice, I mean, it's touching hearing what you say. I practice letting go and letting go and letting go whilst you're speaking, and seeing if I can just be here with you and be that kind of space that you're talking about, that the kind of silence that then invites you to discover yourself, that makes it possible, that lays out. Because of course we're talking about inner silence, but it's not really just inner, it's between us, which is something you were hinting at whilst you were talking. It really sort of establishes a field in which we both are and other people are with us. And it seems to me that we can make that field more or less constraining by how we are, how we participate in it. So then what I'm up to when I can is softening and softening and softening and opening and actually also delighting in being in your presence, just being in a sort of awe of, and this isn't mentioned in this piece. It says refuge and rest and of acceptance. For me also, delight and wonder and awe are getting to be with another being who has things to say. And I know that there are parts of me that want to go, ooh, 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 ooh. Lizzie just said something, I've got to remember that because I've got something really brilliant to say in response to that. So I'm in the practice of noticing when that happens and letting that happen, but not grasping onto it, because of course things are arising all the time whilst you're speaking, responses and possibilities, and I want to honor that they are there too, and then keep on staying in this loving, open, accepting, refuge-like place that's refuge for me and can be refuge for you. And it's exactly the same as I experienced being with you. I really was moved by what you said, that there's a sort of way in this that things can arise that are outside of the ordinary, familiar patterns that we have. Like sometimes I bore myself silly with the things I get frightened of, or the things that I obsess about, or the stuff I'm trying to control. It's like, I do that. I could do that all day, every day. Wouldn't make any difference, actually, apart from giving me a horrible experience. But the possibility that by being with one another in this way, in contact with this kind of silence, even when we're speaking, is not only refuge, is also a place of the birth of things that we might not even know that we have to say, or that can see, or can feel, or can imagine. And what I wonder is to do that for one another, to be the ones who make it possible for us to head out into fresh territory, rather than just, because I think most of the other thing that we do when we're noisy inside or noisy with one another is sort of some way of keeping things in the familiar zone, or trying to. And there are whole worlds in us. I really want to know what you have to say. Also, we've been in this conversation for 5 years and more, this public conversation, this version of the conversation. And it's a great wonder to me that I think because we've made this is the center of what this practice is, there's a 5-year conversation that keeps on, things get born in it. I never come to this conversation thinking, oh, another week with Lizzie, we'll just talk about the same old. It's not how it goes. And I think it's really closely connected to everything that you were just saying.
I'm noticing how unfrightened I feel to be this way. You know, there are times when I think, well, if I let someone say everything they want to say, what am I going to do with everything that comes out? Like I can't, or if I don't know how to handle the thing that they say. But when I rely on the perpetual inner silence, out of which goodness knows what can arise for me too, it feels like I don't have to feel afraid of what's going to come, because I'll have this still to meet whatever's here. So it seems to me like an invitation to really, really intentionally not thinking that I have to control, or not that I could anyway, what comes out of someone else's mouth. But I mean, there are ways I could do that. You know, there are ways I could only ask you the questions I want to hear the answers to, or only be with you in a certain way that affords a slither of you to come forward. You know, it does take courage to go, well, I want to know what's true rather than what I want to hear from you. Because what's true for you might be different for what's true to me, for me, or something, or what's okay for me to hear in some part of me. But this invitation to to encounter the silence in me seems to bring forth a kind of courage and openness to what's here that really helps me not be afraid. If I know I can always reach for the inner silence, if I can always reach for the place in me that's open and foundational, as you said at the beginning of this, that can be and is a profound support to me being with what is in someone else, in myself even. I mean, that's the other thing, Justin, you know, we've spoken about heart's work so much. This inner silence seems to me to be a place of sanity, of strength and unwaveringness, like the beforeness, before all the habits, before all the inner things, inner voices. That place that is clean and clear and kind and loving and curious. That can also be a receiver of our stuff. Like, we don't have to be in conversation with another human being to be in conversation with another being. You know, we're in conversation with other beings in ourselves all the time. You know, the part of me that's worried, the part of me that's catastrophizing, the part of me that's anxious, the part of me that's neurosing about goodness knows what again. I can bring this inner silence to each of those parts. Like, that's possible. Like, we're quite sophisticated beings. Like, I think get blown away by our sophistication all the time, that I can be something for myself, that I can hold myself in something. And of course, it helps to be with somebody to learn how to do that and to talk about it and have language for that. But it is true that we can hold ourselves, that we have capacity to be in relationship with ourselves. We're not just a one-way street on the inside or something. So I'm finding it very, I don't know, like aligned with faith or something. This silence, inner silence, gives me faith that I can be with the parts of me that come, the parts of you that come, and that it's not only bringing me capacity to be with, but it's also an invitation for this new ground that we were talking about as well. Because discovery feels really important to me as a human. You know, like when something new arises in my awareness of who I am or what's possible, or a horizon shifts, and I think, oh, hold on a second, the world seems different than before because this has happened or because I'm this now. That feels like gold to me in the human experience, that there is something that I haven't seen yet and now I can see it. I've learned something about me or about you or about the world, a tree. That feels so important, and somehow the prerequisite to that even happening seems like this inner silence that Rachel's talking about.
It's a lovely reminder, an important reminder from you, Lizzie, that we can be this for ourselves. And you said it in this most excellent way, that somehow this is is there something before everything else gets started, before all these parts of us that you were talking about, that we've talked about, get going, is this. And actually, you only have to spend a little bit of time with a newborn to see how that's the case, like what it's like to be with a newborn, what it evokes in most of us most of the time, particularly if we're not the ones having to keep this newborn one alive, but just dropping in to experience the presence of them.
Anybody watching, you can see that Vespa, my little girl, has just come in to see us. Hasn't happened in quite a while. She's escaped. Yeah. And Justin, I think it's probably quite near our time to be ending anyway.
It is. Yeah.
But Vespa gets to be on our Turning Towards Life.
Well,
It's part of the scene.
Yeah. And maybe that's a wonderful, wonderful place for us to stop, is with this feeling of what's the before that we all are, that we can be for ourselves and bring to one another.
Yeah, this was definitely a big part of beforeness. Look at her.
Yeah.
If you're not watching the video, Vespa's basically sitting here with a disheveled hairdo and her Christmas pajamas on and beaming.
It's wonderful to have you with us, Vespa.
So Justin, thank you for this time and this incredible reflection of this silence, and thank you to Rachel, if you're ever listening to us. We're profoundly grateful for you saying these words, bringing this language to us and inviting this conversation in us, so thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you, Vespa. Thank you, everyone.
We'll see you all
We'll be back
week.
next week. Bye.
Okay, bye.